Shalom, welcome back. So this is the Ebionites 102. That's the second semester course of looking at the doctrines of the Ebionites. In part one, we looked at what it is that the Catholic Church, represented by Epiphanius, said about the Ebionites, and I made the case that it's essentially he's kind of splitting this group up into several different groups, and I think the reason he's doing that is to avoid or confuse the issue about the Ebionites being the earliest Christians, or at least the descendants of the apostles, of the disciples of Jesus himself. And the reason for that was to protect the Catholic Church's pretended authority. If he were to openly admit that the Catholic Church was founded really upon the doctrines of Paul, not upon the doctrines of Jesus, and that the apostles and their followers were actually Ebionites, it would undermine the authority of the church. So there are several doctrines that the Ebionites believed that are seen to be as controversial. And in reality, they shouldn't be, because it is what Yeshua taught them. What should be controversial is rejecting the doctrines of Yeshua and the apostles that he chose in favor of this 13th supposed apostle who had no authority, who came in his own name, who taught things contrary to the genuine apostles, and above all, things contrary to very plain statements made by Yeshua. That should be the controversial part. But rather, the things that people get hung up on are like the diet that was taught and kept by the Ebionites, and their rejection of the virgin birth, which if it was an addition, if it's something that wasn't there originally, it should be rejected. So we're going to continue on. We're going to be looking at this division that developed in the assembly, and this controversy between Paul and Peter. Something I've spoken about here before, but I think it's a good introduction into this segment of what we're going to be looking at. So, in Galatians chapter 2, Paul writes, when Cephas, that's Kepha, Peter, when Peter came to Antioch, I opposed him to his face, because he stood to be condemned. Before certain men came from James, he had been eating with the Gentiles, but when they arrived, he began to draw back and separate himself, because he was afraid of those of the circumcision. And the rest of the Judeans also joined him in this hypocrisy, so that even Barnabas was led astray with them by their hypocrisy. But when I saw that they were not walking uprightly with the truth of the gospel, I said to Kepha in front of them all, if you, although you are a Judean, live like a Gentile and not like a Judean, how can you force the Gentiles to live like Judeans? And so this, sometimes in certain translations, this last passage will say, how can you compel them to Judaize? And so it's this is the origin of the word Judaize. Apparently it's a word made up by Paul. So how... Well, okay, so first of all, is this really the issue? Everybody focuses on this bottom part, verse 14, where he's accusing Peter of trying to force the Gentiles to, quote, Judaize. But I want to back up, and let's look at this part up here first. Peter began to draw back and separate himself. And instead of focusing on, why was he wanting them to Judaize, because I don't think that's what the issue was. Paul says that the reason he drew back was because he was afraid of those of the circumcision. I find that hard to believe. The reason I find it hard to believe is because Peter was one of the three apostles that were named pillars of the congregation. The circumcision, that was just the Jerusalem assembly. And that was known in the early church, that the circumcision was just another name for the Jerusalem assembly, the party of the circumcision. It was not a like this extremist sect within the Jerusalem assembly, as some pastors I've heard try to make it out to be. That it wasn't. It was the assembly itself. It was the leadership of the assembly. In fact, Eusebius, in his ecclesiastical history, he refers to the bishops of the circumcision as the family of Yeshua. He speaks about the assembly in Judea as the circumcision. So they were, it wasn't some faction that was causing Paul to have problems. It was the leadership of the assembly itself. And Peter was part of that leadership. So why would he be afraid of those of the circumcision? It makes no sense. He's not afraid of James. That's what Paul's basically saying. These people came from James, and Peter was scared of them. No, that's not the issue. And we'll see it's not the issue in a moment. So the question is, why did Peter draw away? In the Nazarene Acts, Book 1, Chapter 19, it says, "When Peter had thus spoken, he retired to take food along with his friends, but he ordered me," this is Clement speaking, he ordered me to eat by myself. "And after the meal, when he had sung praise to God and given thanks, he rendered to me an account of this proceeding and added, 'May Yahweh grant to you to be made like to us in all things, that receiving baptism, you may be able to meet with us at the same table.' Having thus spoken, he ordered me to go to rest, for by this time both fatigue and the time of delay caused to sleep." So here we have what is a likely explanation as to why Peter was withdrawing himself from table fellowship. Because when you have a new believer, Clement was a Gentile, and he is not baptized, he's not like a full member of the assembly yet, and so they're not having table fellowship yet. There's a book, The Salt Covenant, by it was written in the 1800s by this man. Last name is Trumbull. If you can find that book, I know you can find it online. I've read it before. It's a wonderful book. He talks about this idea in the ancient Near East of the covenant of salt, that a meal, if you sit down to a meal with someone, it is a covenant meal. And if you understood that book, if you were read and understand that book, then some of this stuff would make more sense. Because if you're sitting down at a meal with other people, and salt is on the table and it's being put on the food, it forms a covenant of salt. It's like it's a type of fellowship meal, but I think it even goes beyond that. And we get a little bit more explanation as we get into this. But if the person that you're dining with, if they had if they were possessed by a demon, if a demon was lurking within them or whatever, then you're essentially having a covenant meal with this unclean spirit. And so Peter, as he goes on to explain later on, we'll get to these verses, if he waits until after Clement is baptized and after Clement is keeping the commandments of Yeshua, then any type of unclean spirit is going to be removed from him by the baptism. And so until the person is baptized, they wouldn't eat and have table fellowship with them. So the same issue comes up again at the end of Book 2, the Nazarene Acts. It says, when the crowds had withdrawn, Peter commanded the table to be spread on the ground, in the open air, in the court where the disputation had been held, and sat down together with those 11. But I dined, reclining with some others, who had made a beginning of hearing the word of God, and were greatly beloved. So here again, this is Clement. Clement is the narrator, and he is still not baptized. The previous passage we looked at was at the end of Book 1. Now we're at the end of Book 2. He still hasn't been baptized, and he's still separating. But notice that it's not for lack of affection. I mean, Clement says that him and the other people were very much beloved. They were loved by Peter and Peter's apostles, the ones who were fully initiated. And they were not separated because Peter was trying to force them to Judaize. He was trying to give them time to compel themselves to make the decision of whether they wanted to actually be baptized and become an official member of the congregation. And it wasn't because he didn't like them. They were beloved of him. He just could not sit down and have a table fellowship with them. In the next chapter, it says, Peter, most benignantly regarding me, that perhaps that separation might cause me sorrow, says to me, it is not from pride, O Clement, that I do not eat with those who have not yet been cleansed, but I fear lest perhaps I should injure myself and do no good to them. So Peter, like this word benignantly, I mean, that just means like kindly. Like he's being very kind and being gracious to Clement, and he's like, look, it's not from pride, which is what I've heard that said before when people talk about that whole interaction in Galatians chapter 2. Oh, well, Peter, he was just so prideful he couldn't even, bear to have table fellowship with the Gentiles. No, that's not it. Peter's telling you what it is. He says, for this I would have you know for certain, that everyone who has at any time worshipped idols and has adored those whom the pagans call gods, or has eaten of the things sacrificed to them, is not without an unclean spirit, for he has become a familiar friend of demons, and a cohabiter from them seizes and afflicts him. Therefore he is impure by means of an unclean spirit, if he has been worshipping idols because of fear or because of love. And by these means he is not free from an unclean spirit, and therefore needs the purification of baptism, that the unclean spirit may go out of him, which has made its abode in the inmost affections of his soul, and what is worse, gives no indication that it lurks within, for fear that it shall be exposed and expelled. So this should be beginning to give you a little bit of clarification, a little bit of understanding as to why Peter withdrew from those Gentiles in Antioch. Because after the Acts 19 conference, where Paul goes to Jerusalem and he's trying to make a case that you don't have to be circumcised to be saved, and the decision, whether you understand it or not, the decision that was reached is that with regards to Gentiles who are turning to the faith. So once you are baptized, once you become a full-fledged member of the congregation, you're no longer a Gentile. That's one thing we need to understand. A Gentile is someone outside of the covenant. So if a Gentile is turning, that means they're in the process of turning. They're not fully converted yet. So James laid out some purity commands, some starter commands to not eat things with blood, not to eat things sacrificed to an idol, not to partake of fornication, or eat things that are strangled. So, 3 of the 4 commands deal with eating, and those were not the only commands ever. Like a lot of churches try to act like, oh, well, these are the only 4 requirements that the early church determined that people had to keep, which that's false. That's not it. I mean, you couldn't still, use the name of God in vain and other types of sin. It doesn't mean that you can steal. It's those were 4 purity starter commands. And in the Nazarene Acts, Peter even says these are the first commands of many, and meaning that this is the things you had to do just to get your foot in the door, basically. And notice that's the condition that Clement was in. He said these people were making a beginning of hearing the word of God. These were Gentiles who were turning to the faith. They were not fully converted yet. So this actually lines up perfectly with Acts 15. Goes on to say, this is the next chapter. For these unclean spirits love to dwell in the bodies of men, that they may fulfill their own desires through the obedience of their host, and by influencing their behavior to partake of these things which they themselves desire, they may compel them to obey their own lust, so that they may become entirely vessels of demons. Let no one of you therefore be saddened at being separated from eating with us. For each one ought to observe that it is just for so long a time as he pleases. For he who wishes soon to be baptized and separated but for a little while, but he for a longer who wishes to be baptized later. Everyone, therefore, has it in his own power to demand a shorter or a longer time for his repentance, and therefore it lies with you, when you wish it, to come to our table, and not with us, who are not permitted to take food with anyone who has not been baptized. It is rather you, therefore, who hinder us from eating with you, if you interpose delays on the way of your purification, and defer your baptism. So, again, back to what was said in Galatians, Peter was not attempting to force them to Judaize. He was attempting, he was giving them the time to make the decision, and it lay within the people of the assembly to decide when they were ready to be baptized. I think it should be pretty apparent what happened, that Peter was there, and he thought that Paul had been teaching these people to obey the purity commands, the starter commands, and that these people had been baptized. And then at some point, possibly what happened was that James got a copy of 1 Corinthians, and he read in 1 Corinthians where Paul said that only those who are weak in faith abstain from eating meat sacrificed to idols, and that you're no better off if you eat or you don't eat, and how Paul talks about how his freedom should not be judged by another's conscience, and so forth, with regards to eating meat sacrificed to idols. And all of that is said in 1 Corinthians chapters 8 and 10. Paul's position is that it's no big deal to eat meat sacrificed to idols. Yeshua's position in the 2nd chapter of Revelation is that teaching people it's okay to eat meat sacrificed to idols is a doctrine of Balaam, and it's a stumbling block. And Yeshua himself calls that a deep thing of Satan. So probably what happened was James read 1 Corinthians, and then he sent these messengers to Antioch to see what was going on. And Peter was already there. He had no idea that this stuff was going on. And then these guys show up from James, probably with a copy of 1 Corinthians, and they show it to Peter. And then Peter withdraws from table fellowship because he realizes that things are not being done the way they're supposed to. It wasn't from pride. It was from a sense of self-preservation. He's not going to do anyone any good if he gets himself, accidentally gives an open door to a demon by having table fellowship with someone. And here, this is later on. This is when Peter is speaking to Clement's mother. So at this point, Clement has been baptized. And he meets Clement's mother. They actually meet her in a way that's unexpected. And Peter is explaining to her that because of their religious faith, she cannot have table fellowship with them unless she herself is baptized. He says, but this also we observe, not to have a common table with Gentiles unless, when they believe, and on the reception of the truth, are baptized in the name of the Master. And when we eat with them, and then we eat with them. Otherwise, even if it were a father or a mother or wife or sons or brothers, we cannot have a common table with them. Since, therefore, we do this for the special cause of religion, let it not seem hard to you that your son cannot eat with you until you have made the same judgment of the faith that he has. And this underlined part, I think this is the right way to articulate the issue that was going on in Antioch. He realized that the people in Antioch did not practice the same judgment of faith that Peter did. Something wasn't being done right. I think the issue was the meat sacrifice to idols issue. Now, last time, in the previous video, we talked about how the Ebionites did not eat meat. I do not believe it was just the issue about, I believe it's two separate issues. Eating meat sacrificed to idols is about the whole demonic issue with the meat itself. But any meat, it's both. It's not as long as it's not sacrificed to an idol, they could eat it. That's not in any of the documents that we have. None of the information says, but if they were assured that it hadn't been sacrificed to an idol, they could eat it. Because the meat sacrificed to an idol was worse than meat itself, but they still didn't eat meat. People try to make the whole issue about eating meat just about this one issue, about the idolatry issue, but it's not just that, and we'll get into that in just a minute. But they're two separate issues. Meat sacrificed to an idol is worse. It's like having table fellowship with a demon. So, back to Galatians 2:11. Now we can understand why he began to separate himself. But also, notice here in verse 13, the rest of the Judeans also joined him in this hypocrisy, so that even Barnabas was led astray with them by their hypocrisy. Okay, so these 7 words here that are in yellow, it's actually one word in Greek that is translated into these 7 words. Soon upoko, I don't know how to say that word. Soon upak renom ahi, I guess is how you say it. It means to play a part with. But notice that they don't translate it as play a part with. They say join him in this hypocrisy. So this is the translator reinforcing Paul. This is like I've talked about before. The translators are Paul's best friend, right? This is not a fair translation. This is a biased translation. The definition of the word has nothing to do with hypocrisy. It just means they played a part with him. They joined him. So now if we take out this part, and it says, and the rest of the Judeans also joined with him, so that even Barnabas was led astray with them by their hypocrisy. Now the second mention of hypocrisy, that's legit. But when you remove that grayed out portion, it becomes a little bit more clear what's going on here. Paul was on the losing end of this. The Judeans, the men from, so on one side it was the Judeans that came from James and Peter and even Barnabas were on one side against Paul. So to me it sounds like Paul is the one who got rebuked. So now we can move on to verse 14 because we have an idea of what's going on. Paul says, when I saw they were not walking uprightly with the truth of the gospel, I said to Kepha. Okay, so here's what someone does. If someone has a narcissistic personality disorder, you know what they do? When they do something wrong, they blame you for the wrong that they're doing. They're masters at reversing the blame, and they turn it on the accuser and make the victim into the perpetrator. And that's what Paul's doing here. You see, Peter saw that they were not walking uprightly with the truth of the gospel. So what does Paul accuse him of? Paul accuses Peter of the same thing Paul's doing. So now he turns the tables on Peter and says, when I saw that they, the apostles, I mean, the leadership, including James and Peter, were not walking uprightly with the truth of the gospel, then I'm going to get up in Peter's face in front of all of them. See, but we've already seen that that's not the issue. It wasn't that he was trying to force them to live like Gentiles or like Judeans. Peter was just trying to make them. He was withdrawing because he saw they weren't doing things the way they were supposed to. So, I think most of the listeners on my channel have switched over from the typical Gentile mindset of the Torah is done away with and we don't have to obey Torah. So most people, even if they're not vegetarian like the Ebionites and the apostles and Jesus was, they're at least trying to eat kosher, not eating meat, not eating pork, like pork, shellfish, and stuff like that. So, most people are probably not celebrating idolatrous holidays that have roots in paganism and are doing things that are more Torah compliant. So as someone who's Torah compliant, who's trying to be obedient to God, have you ever had to explain to a family member why you can't do Christmas? Or explain to a coworker why you can't work on Sabbath? Or explain to a Christian why you don't eat pork? And in the process of any of these conversations, have you ever had them take offense to your beliefs? And when they took offense, do you think it was because they were projecting your beliefs as judgment upon themselves? So like if you're here watching these videos and you're on my channel, I'm assuming that you want the truth. And I'm not gonna back down from teaching the truth. This is all, like everything I talk about on here, everything that I show you, it's all backed up by sources and citations, and there's places I get this. I didn't just decide to become a vegetarian one day. I didn't just decide to stop doing other practices that went against God's desire. It's all stuff that God led me to understand this stuff. So I'm not coming to your house to see what you eat. I'm not gonna show up one day and be like, hey, I need to examine your kitchen to see if you're doing, like, you have a choice whether to watch these videos or not. Like, that's should be clear, and no one's going to force you to do anything. Not any more than Peter was forcing the Gentiles to Judaize or whatever it is that Paul was accusing them of. So it shouldn't be viewed as me that I'm judging you. I'm trying to teach you. I'm trying to show you the truth, the way that Peter taught the truth. And look, if you've ever made a decision about not eating certain types of meat, like pork, and you've mentioned that to a Christian for some reason, it may be that you had to, like, someone was offering you something that you couldn't eat, like they were offering you some bacon, and you're like, no, I can't, I don't eat that. And they asked why, so you tell them why. And they will, if you've ever went through that type of conversation, you've probably at some point had this verse pulled out to shame you and ridicule your position. This is written by the apostate. It says, but the Spirit says expressly that in later times some will fall away from the faith, paying attention to seducing spirits and doctrines of demons. Ooh, scary, right? Through the hypocrisy of men who speak lies, branded in their own conscience as with a hot iron, forbidding marriage and commanding to abstain from foods which God created to be received with thanksgiving by those who believe and know the truth. For every creature of God is good, and nothing's to be rejected, if it is rejected with thanksgiving, for it is sanctified through the word of God and prayer. So, yeah, if you pray over the unclean meat that God commanded you not to eat, he's certainly going to clean it up for you. That's what we're supposed to believe. So, ironically, when I stopped eating meat altogether, I had Hebraic roots people pulling this verse out. The same verse that I know for a fact that Christians were using against them. And, first of all, just the ludicrous side of this whole story. They were supposed to believe that Satan's master plan is to get people to stop eating meat or unclean meat or whatever you want to interpret this verse to mean. I mean, most people generally think that keeping the dietary commands is a healthier lifestyle. Even if you believe it's just about pork, that, like, if you have heart disease, your heart doctor will tell you to stop eating pork because it's really bad for your heart and it clogs your arteries and all kind of issues. So I guess Satan's master plan is to have everyone eat a healthier diet. I mean, really? Like, is that really Satan's master plan? But I want to take this a different direction and just ask, did Yahweh create animals to be food? Like, this is really the argument that this whole collection of 4 verses hinges upon. Did Yahweh create animals to be food? So if we're going to find out if Yahweh created animals to be food, we should probably turn back to the creation of the animals. Genesis 1:24. God said, let the land produce living creatures according to its kinds, cattle, creeping things, wild animals, each according to its kind. And it was so. God made the wild animals according to their kind, the cattle according to their kinds, and the creatures that creep on the ground according to their kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, I now give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the entire earth, And every tree that has fruit with seed in it, they will be yours for food. And to all the animals of the earth, and every bird of the air, and to all the creatures that move on the ground, everything that has the breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food. And it was so. So, I can't find anything in the creation narrative that says God created the animals for food. I can see in the second chapter of Genesis that God created the animals to be companions for man, for Adam. And I can see in Genesis chapter 1 where God gave the animals a vegetarian diet, including man, a vegetarian diet, and not. But I see nothing in here that says he said you can eat these animals, that I made these animals for you to eat. If you happen to have the verse from the creation narrative that says that God created these animals for the purpose of being food, I would like to see it. I don't. So, I don't find that in Genesis chapter 1 and chapter 2. Now, some people will say, but things changed, right? It changed. We got kicked out of the garden. Well, first of all, Yahweh says numerous times that he doesn't change. Malachi 3:6, I am Yahweh, I change not. 1 Samuel 15:29, moreover, the eminence of Israel, a.k.a. Yahweh, does not lie nor change his mind. Psalm 55:19, Elohim, who's enthroned from of old, who does not change. I'm just going to skip down to my favorite. My favorite one is James 1:17. Every good gift and every perfect gift from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no change, nor even a faint image of shifting. Not even a shadow of change. So things didn't change. Not in that regard. I mean, yeah, there was a fall. But were we not redeemed? If Yeshua redeemed us, should we not be living like redeemed mankind? Did Yeshua think that things have changed since beginning? Did the rules change since the beginning? In Matthew 19, the Pharisees came to him and tempted him, saying, is it lawful for a man to put away his wife for any cause and give her a certificate of divorce? And Yeshua answers and says, haven't you read that the one who made them of old made them male and female? And he said, for this cause a man shall leave his father and mother, and shall be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no more two, but one flesh. What therefore the Creator has joined together, man cannot separate. And they asked him, why then did Moses command us to give her a certificate of divorce and put her away from his house? And he said to them, Moses, because of your obstinance, allowed you to put away your wives. But from the beginning, it had not been so. Is there any reason why Yeshua could not use this same argument with regards to the diet? If they had asked, well, didn't Moses command us to eat certain animals that, the clean animals? And Yeshua might say something like, well, Moses commanded you that because of your obstinance. But from the beginning, it was not so. So my point is that Yeshua seemed to think it was a perfectly reasonable explanation to say that's the way it was in the beginning, when forming a doctrinal type of commandment. Notice also in Isaiah when he describes what some churches call the kingdom age, the restoration of things on earth, when like in their theology, Jesus returns and, sets up, heaven on earth, that this is the way we're going to be living. It says, a wolf shall dwell with the lamb, a leopard lie down with the young goat, and the calf and the young lion and the fatling together, as a little child leads them. And a cow and a bear shall feed, their young ones lie down together, and a lion eat straw like an ox. And the nursing child shall play by the cobra's hole, and the weaned child shall put his hand in the adder's den. They do no evil nor destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth shall be filled with the knowledge of Yahweh as the waters cover the sea. And so this is the way that things are going to be. Like, this is Yahweh's desire, that there is no killing each other and eating each other for food. It's, the lion is eating straw like an ox. The cow and the bear shall feed together. And in verse 10, it says, in that day there shall be a root of Jesse standing as a banner to the people. Unto him the Gentiles shall seek, and his rest shall be esteemed. And it shall be in that day that Yahweh sets his hand again a second time to recover the remnant of his people. And, I for a long time, I didn't realize, like, I always thought that verses 6 through 9 would be fulfilled in the kingdom that is set up after the greater Exodus, that will be brought into this kingdom, and Yeshua will reign over this kingdom, and that we'll be living in this state of, like utopia or whatever. But according to this, the way it reads here, verse 10 doesn't happen until the earth is already in that condition. That we should be living this life of harmony, and then there will be the root of Jesse standing as a banner to the people. And in that day, Yahweh sets his hand again to recover the remnant of his people. But I noticed something else about these verses. Do you notice a theme that reoccurs throughout these verses? A little child leads them, a nursing child shall play, the weaned child shall put his hand in the adder's den. Reading this, the thing that comes to mind for me is Matthew 18, where Yeshua calls his little boy to himself and set him in the middle of them and said, most certainly I tell you, unless you repent and turn and become as this little child, you will in no way enter into the kingdom of heaven. What happens in verse 10? In verse 10, Yahweh sets his hand to regather his people and set up his kingdom on earth. And Yeshua is saying that you'll no way enter that kingdom unless you become like a little child. Are these verses connected? They seem to be. There seems to be a connection here. Speaking of entering the kingdom of heaven, Yeshua says, not everyone who calls me Master, Master will enter into the kingdom of heaven, but only he who does the will of my Father who's in heaven. They will enter into the kingdom of heaven. Did we see the will of the Father being played out in Isaiah 11 just now? The harmony among God's creatures. In the sermons of Peter, book 7, chapter 4. And these things which are well pleasing to God are these: to pray to him, to ask from him, recognizing that he is the giver of all things and gives with discriminating law. to abstain from the table of devils, not to taste dead flesh, nor to touch blood, to be washed from all pollution, and the rest in one word, as the God-fearing Judeans have heard, do you also hear, and be of one mind in many bodies. Let each man be minded to do to his neighbor those good things he wishes for himself, the things that are well-pleasing to God, the will of my Father. Among those things listed by Peter is not to taste dead flesh. That's Peter's words, not mine. And Peter says that those are Yeshua's words. He makes a point in both the sermons of Peter and in the Nazarene Acts that everything he teaches is what he learned from Yeshua. It's not his own, whatever he thinks is good in his own mind. And I've said that numerous times myself. I'm not making this stuff up. I'm just telling you what's written down. If you're tired of living in a fallen world, maybe we should start living like we're back in the garden. In Genesis chapter 1, we saw the diet that Yahweh gave us at creation. And, if we can't go back to the garden itself right now, we can certainly keep the menu that Yahweh gave us. It's not beyond our power. People like to make claims that, no one can survive on a vegetarian diet. Well, I can tell you, I don't know where that comes from, because there's millions of people worldwide that eat vegetarian, and they're doing fine. I'm in much better health than I was when I first started eating vegetarian. I can tell you that for a fact. In Luke 17:20, Yeshua says, having been asked by the Pharisees when the reign of Elohim would come, he answered and said to them, the reign of Elohim does not come with intent watching, nor shall they say, look here or look there, for look, the reign of Elohim, the reign of God, is in your midst. In your midst. It almost sounds like Yeshua's telling us that it's right here. It's right here for you to take. Which, if that's the case, if it's in our midst, then it has to be dependent upon our actions. We're just waiting for it to manifest. Like if it's here, if it's in our midst, we're just waiting for the manifestation of this kingdom. Maybe it's within us. Maybe it's within our own actions and our own power. And when we start living like we've been redeemed, maybe that's when the redemption will manifest itself. What about Exodus 20 verse 13? You shall not kill. Now, I know that some translations, the more modern translations, are going to you shall not murder. And they say that murder is what Exodus 20:13 is about. It's not about just killing. You can kill for a good reason. Well, I don't think 20:13 is about murder. And the word is ratzak. That's the word translated kill by the King James and murder by the newer translations. But, in Numbers 35:11, really all through Numbers 35, like it's talking about the cities of refuge and the commandment to create these cities of refuge. So this word, ratzak, comes up a lot throughout that chapter. And reading the chapter as a whole, if you're using a concordance so that you can identify the word ratzak, which is Strong's 7523, it's easy to see that it's not about murder, because you don't murder someone accidentally. You could kill someone accidentally. But murder is intentional. So, like Numbers 35:11 is one of the spots where you can tell that it's Ratzak doesn't mean murder. Numbers 35:11, then you shall appoint for yourselves cities to be cities of refuge for you, that the killer, the highlighted word in yellow is the word Ratzak, which is kind of weird because it's a verb. Ratzak is a verb, but they're using it as a noun. That the killer who strikes unwittingly may flee there. So, if you kill someone accidentally, that's not murder. The cities shall be to you for refuge, that the avenger, that the killer not die until he stands before the congregation for judgment. It's not talking about a murderer. A lot of the newer translations say manslayer, but it's not a murderer. Murder is done with intention. And again, 35:30, whoever kills any person, the killer shall be slain at the mouth of witnesses, but one witness shall not testify against any person that he die. So this person could actually be found not guilty of murder. So obviously, Ratzak does not mean murder. It means to kill. But interestingly enough, well, let's take this a different way. You may think, well, but Ratzak, that probably just means killing a person. Like, you couldn't apply Ratzak to animals, that you would Ratzak an animal. And, well, let's see. I'm pretty sure that God does use it with regards to killing an animal. Isaiah chapter 1. So, I mentioned in the last video I did that there are multiple times where the prophets speak against the sacrifices. And prophets will say that God never commanded the sacrifices. And incidentally, that's what Yeshua says too. He says that God never asked for sacrifices. Isaiah chapter 1 is one of those chapters that is against sacrifices. In fact, it's probably the longest passage against sacrifices, and it's the one which is really the most vehemently against sacrifices. Isaiah 1:11. But what are the multitude of your sacrifices to me, says Yahweh? I have had enough of the burnt offerings of rams and the fat of fed animals. I don't delight in the blood of bulls or of lambs or of male goats. When you come to appear before me, who has required this of your hand? To trample my courts. Bring no more vain offerings. The stench of the smoke is an abomination to me. New moons, Sabbaths, convocations, I can't bear these evil assemblies. My soul hates your new moons and your appointed feast. They're a burden to me. I'm weary of bearing them. When you spread out your hands, I will hide my eyes from you. Yes, when you make many prayers, I will not hear. Your hands are full of blood. Does that sound like Yahweh desires sacrifices? He continues speaking against the sacrifice. Now, at this point, he does go, and he's told you what he doesn't like. These are the things I don't like. Verse 11, I don't delight in these things. And then he takes a little break to give this is the thesis. He gives you the antithesis. He tells you, this is what I do want. He says, I do want justice and mercy, and I want you to walk in righteousness. and not like the point is that God doesn't desire this religious nonsense. He never asks for sacrifices. What he doesn't want this religious nonsense. What he wants our behavior to change. He wants us to have mercy, compassion, justice, and righteousness. And he speaks about that for about 5 verses, and then he switches back to speaking against the sacrifices again. And he says, how the faithful city has become a prostitute. She was full of justice and righteousness lodged in her, but now murderers. Ratzach. The same word in Exodus 20, verse 13. Who are the murderers? What is he referring to? He's referring to this. This is the murderers. Your hands are full of blood. It's just not human blood. Do you think God will hear your prayers while your mouth is full of the blood of his creatures? Just a thought. He specifically says right here, I'll hide my eyes from you over the animal sacrifices. But are you not sacrificing them to your belly? And you may say, well, that's different. Killing a man, killing an animal, there's difference. It's not the same. Thus says Yahweh, heaven is my throne, the earth is my footstool. What kind of house will you build for me? And what place shall be my rest? For all these things has my hand made. And so all these things came to be, says Yahweh. But to this man I will look, even to him who's poor and a contrite spirit and who trembles at my word. But he who kills an ox is as if he killed a man. He who sacrifices a lamb is as if he broke a dog's neck. He who offers an offering as if he who offers pig's blood. He who burns frankincense is he who blesses an idol. Yahweh was telling you he doesn't want your sacrifice. He doesn't want these offerings. He doesn't want these sacrifices. Peter says it in the Nazarene Acts. He says God has no desire for your money. I think you can see why Peter's teachings didn't make it into the church. He who kills an ox is as he who kills a man. I don't think God really draws a line between killing one creature and killing another. Yes, they have chosen their own ways, and their soul delights in their abominations. I also will choose their delusions, and will bring their fears upon them, because when I called, no one answered. When I spoke, they didn't listen. But they did which was evil in my eyes, and chose that in which I didn't delight. Remember what we just read in Isaiah 1:11? What is it that we chose that which he doesn't delight? I don't delight in the blood of bulls or lambs or male goats. I was doing a presentation one time on this very subject, that the Ebionites didn't eat meat, the reasons why they didn't eat meat, and it was a presentation before an audience. And after the presentation, a man walked up to me. First time I met him, and this is someone, he ate meat, so he wasn't a vegetarian, but this is a guy that walked up. He goes, man, I just want you to know, you've answered a question I've had for years. He said, years ago, I was praying, and I was praying, I was reading the Bible, and this passage where God is talking about the sacrifices. And he said that God told me that he didn't desire these sacrifices, He said, God told me, he said, I made the animals with the blood in them. Satan is the one who wants that blood spread on the ground, not me. And the guy says, man, I didn't know what to think of it. Because I see in the Bible where God asked for these sacrifices, and I couldn't understand, but I know I heard the Holy Spirit say that to me. And he goes, and it wasn't until I listened to you that I realized why he said it. If God didn't care, he wouldn't have told that gentleman what he told him. Yeshua said, go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. Have you went and learned what that means? It's a commandment in the gospel. Hosea 6:6, for I desire mercy and not sacrifice, the knowledge of God more than burnt offerings. Notice it says, not sacrifice. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. He doesn't say, I want mercy and sacrifice. This isn't an either or thing. He doesn't want... It's kind of hard to say you have mercy when you're slaughtering a creature. That's not very merciful. I desire mercy and not sacrifice, the knowledge of God more than burnt offerings. But they, like Adam, have broken the covenant. They were unfaithful to me. They were unfaithful to me there. Gilead is the city of those who work iniquity. It is stained with blood. As gangs of robbers wait to ambush a man, so the company of priests murder on the path towards Shechem, committing shameful crimes. What was in Shechem? Shechem is where Mount Gerizim was. It's where the temple for the northern tribes was. That's where when Yeshua was talking to that lady at the well, and she said that our forefathers say we should worship on this mountain, and you Judeans say that you should worship in Jerusalem. That's where they were. That's where they were standing. Shechem was where the northern tribes made their sacrifices. That word for murder in verse 9, highlighted in yellow, ratzak. Thou shalt not kill. Ratzak. That's the murder. The sacrifice. Now you may say, well, we're not sacrificing the animals, we're just eating them. So you're saying the animals aren't dying? You're not paying someone else to kill the animals for you? I'm going to speak about corruptions in the law. Spoken about this before. There's a video I did about answering the Torah hater. For those of you who have questions about, well, doesn't the law say that you can eat meat, or doesn't the law say something about sacrificing? Or maybe just before I started making this video, I saw that somebody had commented on my last video saying that, well, what about maybe the Ebionites just didn't eat meat because the temple was destroyed and they didn't have anywhere to go to get clean meat and stuff. Okay, look, I haven't even responded to the comment yet, but here's the thing. We just went over how, Yahweh never ordained those sacrifices. He never asked for them. And so it would not have made any difference to the Ebionites whether the temple was standing or not. They didn't make sacrifices at the temple when it was standing. They didn't eat meat when the temple was standing either. So it's not that that was the reason. They didn't care about that. The reason they didn't eat meat is because Yeshua told them not to eat meat, that Yahweh did not want animals slaughtered. Jeremiah 8:8, how do you say we are wise, and Yahweh's law is with us? But behold, the false pen of the scribes has worked falsely. The wise men are disappointed. They're dismayed and trapped. Behold, they have rejected Yahweh's word. What kind of wisdom is in them? Reminds me of Yeshua debating back and forth with the scribes and Pharisees. The Shem Tov, instead of scribes, it says sages. The wise men. The sages and Pharisees. I think that this verse 9 was really directed toward men like that. They think they're wise. They think they've got the law, but Jeremiah says that the false pen of the scribe has worked falsehoods. And one time I was discussing this verse with someone, and they said, well, Jeremiah, he's not talking about the written law. He's talking about how people will take the written law and they will they'll orally teach something that goes against the law. And I was like, dude, do you know what a pen is? You don't speak with a pen. He doesn't say the false tongue of the scribes. He says the false pen of the scribes. This is exactly what Yeshua taught Peter. That the lying pen of the scribes worked falsehood. There were falsehoods that were inserted into the law. And so, if you think that referring back to the law and saying, well, I mean, here in the law it says we can have sacrifices, like, you got your head on wrong. The words of Yeshua is what you follow. If Yeshua seems to be contradicting the law, you go with what Yeshua says. That's what Peter says in the first book of the Nazarene Acts. He says, once you've determined that Yeshua is Messiah, you should believe him in all things. You're not going to be able to pull out a text and use it to prove Yeshua wrong. And like, I hear this question come out in different ways over the years, where someone's like, well, why do they not know that it was written here that this or that? Like Epiphanius was saying, do they not know that Abraham fed the angels with meat? And the Ebionites were like, we don't believe that. And he was making fun of them, but the reason they don't believe that is because Jesus told them not to. Jesus revealed this to us. Yeshua revealed this to us. That's their answer. Sermons of Peter, Book 3, Chapter 51. And his sending the scribes and teachers of the existing scriptures as to those who knew the true things of the law that then was is well known. And also he said, I'm not come to destroy the law, and yet that he appeared to be destroying it. He's saying Yeshua said, I came not to destroy the law, and yet he seemed to be destroying it. That is part of one intimating the things which he destroyed did not belong in the law. In that passage of Matthew 5:17, where he says, I come not to destroy the law. In Matthew 5, one of the things he's doing in that chapter, there were parts of the law in the book of Exodus that were actually imported from the Code of Hammurabi. If you've never read the Code of Hammurabi, find a copy of it online. It's not too difficult. Just type in Code of Hammurabi PDF, and you can read the Code of Hammurabi. And it's like reading the book of Exodus with the commandments. Thou shalt not do this, thou shalt do this, thou shalt not do that. But the eye for eye, tooth for tooth, that Yeshua references in Matthew chapter 5, that comes from the Code of Hammurabi. You've heard it said of those of old, an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, but I tell you, to forgive one another. You see, he's quoting the section of the Torah that was taken from the Code of Hammurabi. You can find entire books written on this, written on how the Code of Hammurabi. Now it's not word for word, but you read the Code of Hammurabi, you read the book of Exodus, the part that's called the Holiness Code, and I mean you can tell it's the same. It may be worded a little bit different. Some of the commands may be a little different, like the penalties are a little different, but I mean it's you can tell. And the Code of Hammurabi is older than the book of Exodus. So, like, if we believe that Moses was given the Torah at Mount Sinai, the Code of Hammurabi dates back to the time of... In fact, Hammurabi may have been Nimrod. If he wasn't Nimrod, he was Nimrod's son, if you just go back as far as, like, the timeline goes. Hammurabi lived at the same time as Abraham did. So he seemed to be destroying the law, but what he's actually doing was destroying the parts that didn't belong to the law. And his saying that the heaven and earth shall pass away, but one jot or one tittle shall not pass from the law, intimated that the things which pass away before heaven and earth do not belong in the law in the first place. So what specific things does Peter mention that don't belong in the law? Since then, while the heaven and earth still stand, sacrifices have passed away, kingdoms and prophecies among those born of women, and such like as not being ordinances of God. Hence, therefore, he says, every plant which the heavenly Father has not planted shall be rooted up. Wherefore he, being the true prophet, said, I am the gate of life. He who enters through me enters into life, there being no other teaching able to save. No other teaching. Wherefore also he cried and said, Come unto me, all who labor, that is, who are seeking the truth, and not finding it. And again, my sheep hear my voice, and elsewhere seek and find, since the truth does not lie on the surface. Do you understand what he's saying here? I'm not saying that Moses was wrong, because this is not the things written by Moses. Yeshua supported Moses. Like he affirmed Moses. He said, if you don't believe Moses' words, how can you believe my words? If you don't believe his writings, how shall you believe my words? John chapter 5. But in the same way that Yeshua came and delivered a message, and Yeshua's message was true, and then Paul comes along and distorts Yeshua's message, and you have people thinking that they're following Yeshua today who are not. They're actually following Paul. They just don't know. They don't realize that they've forsaken Yeshua to follow another one. They don't realize it. In the same way, the same thing happened with Moses. Moses came, he gave these commands, and here we are thousands of years later, and people think they're following Moses, but they're actually following Hammurabi or some scribe or Ezra. Generally textual critics think that most of the Torah actually came from Ezra, not from Moses. And so you speak against these additions, and people think you're speaking against Moses. Peter's not speaking against Moses. Yeshua wasn't teaching against Moses. They're teaching against the things that are added to the Torah. And that includes the sacrifices. Now, if we understand the cultural context of sacrifices, sacrifices are directly connected to eating meat. If you had an animal and you were going to slaughter your animal, you would have to take it to, whether you were in Israel or whether you were in Rome or whether you were in freaking Athens, Greece, or wherever, you would take your animal, you would either take it to a temple and have it sacrificed, or you would have an altar set up at your house and sacrifice it. In fact, if you look at the book of Judges in the earliest parts of the Old Testament, there wasn't just a central temple in Jerusalem. There was these, what they called high places, all over the land of Israel where people would take their animals to be slaughtered, and they would give a portion of the meat to the priests, and the rest of the meat they would take home with them to eat. So there wasn't this separation like today. We just think about going to the grocery store and getting some ground beef or something, and we don't think about it in terms of like animal sacrifice, because we have, in our modern mind, we have separated the two. But back in the days of King David, back in the days of Moses, back in the days of Yeshua, in the days of Peter and the other apostles, there would not have been a separation in your mind of these things. But if you're thinking about sacrifices and it doesn't include eating meat, or you're thinking about eating meat and not sacrifices, that's like saying, well, I'm talking about going swimming, but I'm not talking about getting wet. The two were connected. Like idolatry, like you could almost use idolatry as a synonym for eating meat, because that's what happened. You go make the sacrifice at the idol, and you would basically have a fellowship meal with the god of that idol. So it's not an either or type of thing. Like I see some people trying to like reason their way out of it and say, well, as long as you're not sacrificing to anything, then we should be able to eat meat. That's not what it says. Like that's not what the text says. Peter says God desires that we don't eat dead flesh. In that passage, you didn't mention anything at all about sacrifices. The friend of mine who had the Holy Spirit speak to him and say that, I put when I created the animals, I put blood in them. I didn't spill the blood on the ground. It's Satan that wants the blood spilled on the ground, not me. I mean, that wasn't talking about sacrifices. That was talking about slaughtering an animal. If Yeshua had no problem with the Ebionites eating meat, he would have told them, hey, you can just go ahead and slaughter the animals yourself and eat the meat. He obviously didn't tell them that, because for hundreds of years after Yeshua walked the earth, the Ebionites were still not eating meat. So don't try to reason your way out of this and just be like, well, this is talking about sacrifices. It's talking about both. Like both are addressed by this group. And if your goal is not to live your life by the doctrines that Yeshua taught, then okay, fair enough. That's, don't fool yourself. if you want to live by what he said, this is what he said to do. I know all this stuff is not in the Gospels in the canonized church. Like, we know that. We've established that. There's a lot of stuff in the Nazarene Acts that are not in that book. But the thing is, you can also turn back to Isaiah, and you can see the same principle as to what the Ebionites believed present in the writings of Isaiah. He who kills an ox is as if he killed a man. And the other thing, this is something that people have said to me. They said, well, I've never slaughtered an animal, so I don't even know why this pertains to me. I just buy my stuff at the grocery store. Well, the thing is, if you buy your meat at a grocery store, you're just paying someone else to slaughter the animal. It doesn't mean that, it's not that you're not playing a part, you're bankrolling it. So would Yeshua, would God, would Yahweh, would he hold you guilty for paying someone else to do your dirty work? Would you be innocent because it was someone else who actually slaughtered God's creature and not you? And there's this story in 1 Kings, starting at chapter 21. So Jezebel wrote letters in Ahab's name and sealed them with the seal and sent the letters to the elders and the nobles who were in his city, who lived with Naboth. So Naboth owned this vineyard, and Ahaz wanted this vineyard, and Naboth wouldn't let him have it. So that's what's going on here. And So Jezebel intervenes, and she's writing these letters. And she wrote the letter saying, proclaim a fast, and set Naboth on high among the people. Set 2 men, base fellows, before him, and let them testify against him, saying, you cursed God and the king. Then carry him out and stone him to death. So they're setting Naboth up. And so the men of his city, the elders and the nobles who lived in his city, did as Jezebel said, and according as it was written in the letters which she had said to them. They proclaimed a fast, set Naboth on high among the people, and then these 2 men, base fellows, came in and sat before him, and the base fellows testified against Naboth. They said that in the presence of the people, they said that Naboth cursed God and king, and they carried him out of the city and stoned him to death with stones. They bore false witness against him. Then they sent to Jezebel, saying, Naboth has been stoned and is dead. And when Jezebel heard that Naboth was stoned and was dead, Jezebel said to Ahab, arise and take possession of the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite, which he refused to give to you for money, for Naboth is not alive but dead. And when Ahab heard that Naboth was dead, Ahab went and rose up and went down to the vineyard of Naboth Jezreelite to take possession of it. So notice that Ahab, he didn't kill Naboth. In fact, he didn't even conspire to have Naboth killed. This went on behind his back. Jezebel did it. But does that mean that Yahweh let Ahab off scot-free? Well, verse 17 says, Yahweh's word came to Elijah the Tishbite, and said, arise and go down to meet Ahab, the king of Israel, who dwells in Samaria. Behold, he is in the vineyard of Naboth, where he has gone down to take possession of it. Oh man, you can just tell it's about to get real. And you shall speak to him, saying, thus says Yahweh, have you killed Ratzak, and also taken possession? You shall speak to him, saying, thus says Yahweh, in the place where the dogs lick the blood of Naboth, dogs will lick your blood, even yours. And Ahab said to Elijah, have you found me, my enemy? And he answered, I have found you, because you have sold yourself to do that which is evil in the sight of Yahweh. Behold, I will bring evil on you, and I will utterly sweep you away, cut you off from Ahab, everyone who urinates against a wall, and him who is shut up, and him who is left at large in Israel. I will make your house like the house of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, and like the house of Baasha, and the son of Ahiah, for the provocation with which you have provoked me to anger, and made Israel to sin. And the Lord also spoke of Jezebel, saying, the dogs shall eat Jezebel by the rampart of Jezreel. The dogs will eat he who dies of Ahab in the city, and the birds of the sky will eat he who dies in the field. But there was no one like Ahab, who sold himself to do which was evil in the sight of Yahweh, whom Jezebel his wife stirred up. He did very abominably in following idols, according to all that the Amorites did, whom Yahweh cast out before the children of Israel. When Ahab heard these words, he tore his clothes and put sackcloth on his flesh, and fasted and lay in sackcloth and went softly. And Yahweh's word came to Elisha the Tishbite and said, see how Ahab humbles himself? Because he humbles himself before me, I will not bring the evil in his days, but his son's days I will bring the evil on his house. So you got part of the answer there. I mean, it's repentance. You can always repent. Like, I've had people tell me I ate meat all my life. It's like, man, I ate meat all my life too. But the day that Yahweh convicted me of this, I stopped. I've had people tell me that they, in fact, somebody just said something similar to this today in the comments section. They said that they found me several years back, and they stopped listening because of me talking about this issue, about the meat. And then God ends up bringing them back to my channel later when they were ready to hear it. So, I'm telling you, this is, you want the real deal, you want to know the truth, you want to know what y'all really expects out of you, that includes this too. So, if you still think I'm wrong, I've got a challenge for you. I got some homework. It's not a difficult challenge. All you got to do is watch a couple of videos. Easy assignment. Easy assignment. Okay, so here's the first thing. There's a video called Dairy is Scary. It was made by this young lady, Erin Janice. Now, it's only about 5 minutes long. It's a short video. I will warn you, there is some foul language in it. Not a lot, but there is some foul language. So you might want to not watch it when a kid's around. But if you think I'm wrong, this is not even about meat. This is just about dairy. Just watch the video. And after you watch the video, if you think that God is okay with you financially supporting the things you see in the video, put a note in the comments section and say, hey, I watched the video and I don't think God would have a problem with that. And let's just see how many people say, I don't think God would have a problem with what I saw in this video. Dairy is scary. Because if you think God does have a problem with it, maybe you shouldn't be financially supporting the people that do these things. Also, this movie, Earthlings. I don't think there's any profanity in this movie. The guy speaking in this movie is the Joaquin Phoenix. He played Johnny Cash in Walk the Line. Watch this video, Earthlings. And now again, I wouldn't watch this with kids, not because of profanity, but because there's some awful things that go on in these slaughterhouses. This one is about slaughterhouses. Just watch it. And if you think when you get done that God would not have a problem with the way with you paying for people to mistreat animals, the way these animals are mistreated, drop a note in the comment section. And I can tell you, if you eat meat that comes from like the big agricultural conglomerates, this is what goes on. This is not isolated incidents. I've seen lots of other videos of this same sort of stuff from different slaughterhouses, so it's not like it's just one place that does this, but just watch the video. And if you think after watching the video that this is the way that God intended for us to treat his animals, and he has his creatures that he created, and remember, Yeshua said, not a sparrow falls to the ground without Yeshua knowing, or Yahweh knowing about it. And so obviously he cares about his animals. If he would clothe the sparrows who are worth very little, he'll obviously clothe you. So he cares enough about the sparrows to clothe them, right? So just watch this video and just tell me if you think that God's okay with this. If you think God's okay with this, then okay, fine. I haven't made my point then. I guess that's what you're telling me. Maybe I misunderstood something. Maybe you'll watch this and you'll be like, dude, I watched this Earthlings video and there's nothing wrong with it. I don't know what you're talking about saying God doesn't like this stuff. I just, watch the video. And just tell me. I watched Earthlings. Didn't bother me at all. I think God would be perfectly fine with this type of behavior. So that's it. And the thing is, oh, by the way, like people will say that, well, if you buy like kosher beef, like they slaughter the cows in a humane manner, and kosher is not the same as non-kosher. I'm pretty sure in this video they show you a kosher kill at the largest kosher meat producing facility in the United States. They show it to you. So you can see how humane a kosher kill truly is. And the thing is, if you're not going to watch those videos, like if you're someone who eats meat and you don't want to watch those videos, then you've already shown you've already shown that you really don't care. Like, it doesn't matter if you watch it or not. I just think if you do watch it, you might actually see the point that I'm trying to make, which I didn't have to watch the video to obey what Yeshua said. The fact that Yeshua said it, the fact that Peter said it, and that the Holy Spirit told me, I think I told you what, I know I've told the story before, I don't know if I've told it recently, it seems like I may have in the last video, but I was reading this stuff in the Clementine homilies and recognitions, or the Nazarene Acts and the sermons of Peter. I'm trying to switch to the correct names. But I was just like, man, I just can't believe that. I can't believe that's true, that God doesn't want us to eat meat or whatever. And as I was saying that, the Holy Spirit told me, you sound like a Christian who doesn't want to give up his bacon. And I mean, I stopped what I was doing. I was like, okay, touche. Okay, I got you, God. I understand that, like, that confirmed it for me. Like, Yahweh knew what to say to me that would cut through my objections to what I was seeing. So I accepted it then. It took him, that's all he had to say to me. So if you've watched several of these videos, you've got a lot more input than it took me to come around. So hopefully I made my point at this time. Thank you for watching. I pray that this has been a blessing. There's a link in the description where if you want to download a copy of the Rock of Yeshua Foundation, it's essentially what the New Testament would have been if Saul of Tarsus hadn't come along and hijacked the message of Yeshua. So if you ever wondered, well, what would the New Testament be like if Paul wasn't in it? What books would they have in there instead of what Paul wrote? Well, that question's actually answered. You can get a copy of the book for free in PDF form. So if you want the free PDF, there's going to be a link in the description. You can just download it and read it and share it with your friends. Just whatever you want to. Share away. Send it to everybody you love. If you want a print copy, I've got it set up on Amazon, print on demand. You can get it basically for the price of printing plus the shipping and handling that Amazon charges, which I have no say in that. But I made it, man, as close to cost as we could get. Less than $18 for almost an 800-page book. And so if you want the print copy, you can get it. It's essentially just cost plus maybe like 35 cents, something like that, but it's essentially cost. Just if you want more information, get that. Man, you can hear it straight from the mouth of Peter. You can hear it straight. You don't have to even listen to me. You don't have to listen to me and all the stuff I say and waste your time watching these videos. You can just get the book. Just get the book. You hear it straight out of Yeshua's mouth, straight out of Peter's mouth, from the other apostles, from James. And the thing is, the book is fully footnoted. So if there's something that James says that connects with something Paul said or whatever, there's footnotes in there that tell you to go and compare what it is said in like 2 Corinthians or 1 Corinthians. But Paul's letters are not in the Rock of Yeshua Foundation. You've got to go to a Bible and look that footnote up in a Bible. But I mean, if Peter could have made the New Testament instead of Paul, then I think the Rock of Yeshua Foundation would have been what that New Testament would have looked like. So it's yours for free if you want it. Just download the PDF, or you can get the print copy for $18. All right, guys. Well, thanks for listening. I appreciate it. Pray that this has been a blessing, and above all, I pray that it's giving you some things to think about. Thanks for listening. Shalom.